Good evening. Thank you. My name is Greg. My wife is Sarah, and we have two children. My daughter Maddie is 6. My son Elijah is 4. We have 2 dogs, Jack and Bobby, and we live in Mount Washington. And professionally, I run a venture philanthropy fund and this preschool promise effort to give every kid in the city 2 years of quality preschool. And so arguably, you could say I'm a very lucky guy. I have an amazing wife and 2 beautiful, very healthy children, 2 great dogs who incidentally got away a couple of weeks ago, and they were gone for the whole night, and I was overseas, and I love these dogs, in a way that's, everyone loves their animals, right? And I thought they were gone. It turns out they had just ran down the street. They were at some neighbor's house. They didn't know us. They kept them for the night, and in the morning, they came out, and they were walking the dogs, and they saw a poster, and they called us, and the dogs came back. That's not my luck story. I was on the way over here thinking about how lucky I am in that sense that we got our dogs back, but I struggle with luck even in that circumstance. I think as I was flying home, having heard that the dogs were back safely, that, God knew I wasn't ready to lose my dogs. And so this is my challenge with luck. I mean, I can't deny it. I've had an incredibly blessed life, but I struggle with the idea of luck, if for no other reason than I don't really know what it is or why it would be or any of those things. I believe very strongly in God. I have my own personal, relationship with God. I'm not a very religious person, but I have a deep belief in this higher power. And that there is a loving, very generous God working in my life. I've always thought that, even when I was a young kid. I also have this belief in the notion of grit and perseverance, determination, that if you want something, if it's important to you, you'll get it if you are willing to keep at it. And those 2 things oftentimes are hard to reconcile with this idea of luck. So I'll give you a story to help illustrate that. It was about 10 years ago. I was at a political event, and there were a lot of people in the room, and there were lots of speeches, and my mind wandered, as it often does. And I started looking around the room, and I turned over my left shoulder, and there was the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my entire life at a political event of all places. And I thought, I've got to go say something. I've got to go talk to her. But it would be rude to do while people were speaking. So I just kept turning to make sure she was still there. She hadn't moved. And speeches ended, and I immediately turned around, and I couldn't find her. She wasn't there. And she was heading towards the door, and I tried to race over there without seeming desperate, but I wanted to make sure that I talked to this person. I had no idea what I was going to say, but I was obviously compelled to say something. And then by the time I got to the door, she was gone. And I spent days thinking about this person and thinking that I had screwed something up, that I was supposed to meet her. So I got a hold of the person who hosted the event and got the list of all the people that were there, and through some process started to eliminate certain people. All the men eliminated all those people. People I knew, eliminated them, and then it got down to this smaller list. And he eventually started to help me. And literally months later, we determined it could only be one of two people. And so I was going to reach out to one of them, and before I did, he called me. I didn't have their information. He was going to get them. He called me and he said, I know it's not this one person, it's the other one, and I have her phone number and email. And I said, that's phenomenal. That's great. I'll send her a note or I'll give her a call. He said, I'm just going through security. He was on his cell phone. I'm just going through security at the airport. I'll call you right back. And he didn't call me back. And I just kept messing with him for days. He just forgot. He just literally just forgot to send it to me. About a week later, he finally is like, oh, I'm sorry, I totally forgot. I got buried in my email. I do have it. And he sent it to me. And I immediately emailed her, and I said, this is going to sound odd, but you and I were at the same event a couple months ago, and I'd love to, buy you a drink. That was it. That's all I said. And she claims that it was a few days later, but it was within an hour or so. She wrote back, and she said, how about Thursday? And I said, that's great. So we went on our first date, and then a day or two later, we went on our second date, and it was probably within 15 minutes of the second date that I thought to myself, I'm going to marry this person. And 18 months later, I did. I know that there's got to be some luck involved in some of that, right? The challenge, though, is that I also am convinced that there was some providence to it too, right? That somehow, it's not that I think I'm more special or that God is paying, particular attention to me, but I do think there was this reason why the two of us were in the same room, that we were afforded this opportunity where I was, but that wasn't sufficient. It didn't mean that I was going to get the girl and ultimately marry her. It involved a level of perseverance on my part. I never gave up, and the fact is I never will with my wife. So as I was thinking about this story, I struggled with this because this is one of my least favorite four-letter words, luck, because of my strong convictions about God and about grit. So much so, by the way, that I have multiple tattoos. One is of a passage that reminds me of what I think is expected of me from a spiritual standpoint, from God's standpoint, to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. That's on my left arm. Now, right here on my chest is a four-letter word, big block letters, that I look at as a daily reminder, which is grit. That's this idea of perseverance, of sticking to something. Because I think there are, as was the case with my wife, we have these opportunities, right? Things happen in our lives. They're big or they're small, but they happen. Nonetheless, things happen. We're all here for a reason. And I do think that at least for the substantive stuff, that is God's will, or there's something that enables that's bigger than all of us. Now, that's just the opportunity. What we do with it is entirely on us. And if you want something bad enough, if it's that important to you, you just stick to it, work your tail off, persevere, and with a little grit, you'll get it. So that's why it's here. That's why it doesn't say luck, because you can't count on luck, even though I've been really lucky, I guess. But the hope is that if I constantly think of this idea that if you want something bad enough, you'll just keep fighting for it, that I'll have good luck. So wish me luck. Thank you.